Hi, this is Marty Gilbert, and I want to welcome all of you to what I'm hoping might become a regular thing on Mondays from 12 to 12:30 Central Time. But I'm going to test this out and see how it goes. This is an open Q&A session for anybody that has questions on their job search. What I'd like to do is just first give you a little bit of background on the organization that I started and founded and how it might help some of you that are in a search. Let me just go on real quickly. First, let me tell you first that the membership to NSENG is absolutely free. There's no cost. And the moment you enter, you're going to get access to our 9,300 members, and you're going to get 3 webinar recordings from me on how to shorten your job search. We've got a very active LinkedIn group, and there are a lot of jobs that are posted there, as well as a lot of opportunities to share ideas and stories with other members of the organization, because there's no one single way to find your next job. It's going to take a multi-channel marketing approach, and there's a lot of people that are willing to share their advice, but most importantly, help introduce you into some of the companies that you otherwise can't get into on your own. There's a huge number of all kinds of resources available when you become a member of NSENG. And one of them are the 18 webinar recordings, and that number continues to increase from month to month, that you can get access to on all different aspects of your job search. I'm going to mention 2 upcoming events. We've got one this week on Wednesday, the 30th. It's going to be a 2.5-hour workshop that I'm going to be conducting on how to maximize the value of LinkedIn during your job search, because the average job seeker only uses about 40% of what the platform can deliver. So we're really going to focus on a lot of those hidden gems and a lot of things that folks don't necessarily know much about. And then 3 weeks later, on Wednesday, March 20th, I take that back, on April 20th, I'm going to be conducting roughly about a 2-hour session together with Elliot Shapiro, who is an expert when it comes to presentations. And we're going to be talking about how to speak with greater confidence during your job interviews. I do a lot of job search coaching, and I have coaching packages as well as one-on-one custom coaching services. If by chance you feel you need some additional help, please feel free to reach me via email at martygilbert1@gmail.com, and I'm happy to have an exploratory free call with you. So any questions you want to ask are open game. All I ask is that you put them into the chat section so that I can then start to tick through them. So if you have a question, please don't hesitate to put it up there. I know I've gotten a number of questions that people have gone ahead and emailed into me. So I'll keep an eye here on some of the questions as they come in. Please don't hesitate to chat any in. And in the meantime, I see there's a couple that have come in here. One here is from an individual who says, I was recently let go from my company and I'm just starting my job search. Given that, what do you think are the most important actions that I need to take in order to get off to a good start? Well, a lot of things that you need to do, but to me, the most important things that you've got to spend your time on are clearly your value proposition summary, which is really a description that sits at the top of your resume. It sits in the about section of your LinkedIn profile, and it's got to describe to people very quickly what the entirety of your background is about and why they should take the time to want to talk with you. The fact is that there's so many things to talk about. You've got to really whittle it down to about 100 words or less on what are those things that really differentiate you versus other folks. The next couple things are a branding statement, okay, which can be an umbrella statement with regard to your background. And then there needs to be a very targeted list of companies that you're going after. Okay, because like any product that we bring to market, we define who are the audiences that we want to reach because they're aligned with the value that we bring. And the only difference between a new product being brought to market and somebody going after a job search is that you are now that product. Okay, and for a lot of people, that's a hard part of the job process. So that's why defining your value is so important up front, and then being able to articulate who's the audience you're trying to reach. And then you've got to get the vehicles going, essentially through an outbound marketing campaign that gets you to those companies. Because please don't ever let the fact that a company doesn't have jobs advertised on Indeed or LinkedIn or ZipRecruiter or any of these sites, it doesn't mean there aren't opportunities. It means that you've got to make them aware of what you bring. And oftentimes some of the best jobs are ones that aren't advertised. And at any given point in time, 30 or 40% of the jobs in the marketplace are not sitting online. So I see another question in here. Let me just put it out here. What's the average length of time to land a new role these days? Now, I'll tell you, it's taking less time today than it did 12 months ago. And that's good news for everybody, because the fact is that so many companies are telling me that they're having a hard time finding great talent. And what I find hard to believe is that I've got an organization here with over 9,300 members, and about 6,000 of them at least are actively looking for their next opportunity. They've got great backgrounds. So it may be a combination of the fact that, a lot of companies aren't necessarily looking in the right places. But I think on average today, it depends on your experience level. For people that are early in their career, it's not necessarily taking very long, possibly less than 2 months. For folks that are much more advanced, maybe director, VP, and C-level folks, I would say on average, anywhere from 4 to 10 months, even in today's environment where a lot of companies are saying that they're struggling to find good talent. Just keep in mind that as you move up the corporate ladder, there are fewer job opportunities. We don't need as many VPs or as many directors or senior directors in companies as we do of more junior or middle stage folks. So that's always something to keep in mind. All right, here's another question. What advice do you have for breaking into a new industry? I'm pursuing a finance degree and hoping to become a floor trader in Chicago. Okay, great. Thanks, Tyler. Appreciate the question. For breaking into a new industry, some of the things that can affect that are your level. But more importantly, what is it that you are looking for in the way of a role? People in customer-facing roles like sales and marketing, in some cases product management, if they have a lot of interaction with customers, customer-facing roles are going to have a much greater dependence on industry background. What do you bring from previous industries where you've been that is relevant to the industry you're trying to get into? So if you have a lot of experience, and what I mean by that is probably more than a dozen years of experience, one of the things that they're buying into is the fact you bring that industry experience with you. And it's going to be more important, particularly for people in sales and marketing roles, as the folks that are in more industry agnostic roles, like HR, IT, finance, legal. They can make pivots to different industries much easier because their jobs in many cases aren't terribly reliant on their industry knowledge. But I will tell you, you always have a leg up when you go after a job where you bring that industry background. So if you want to break into a new industry, if you have less experience and you're early in your career, it's going to be far easier than somebody that has 10 or more years of experience. If you're not in a customer-facing role, much easier for you to break into new industries. And probably the best way to do that is to start putting together a target list of companies that are in the industries where you want to be, whether it's in healthcare, manufacturing, software, IT, any number of places. You got to start putting together that list. And that list should never be fewer than 30 companies. Good news for people in a job search today is that so many jobs are not necessarily going to require you to be located in the city where the company is headquartered. So your opportunities are going to be far greater today than they ever were. All right, here's another question. What's your advice on the best way to get from networking and application phase to landing an interview and discussing the role with the hiring manager phase? Okay, so one of the great things about your network is that they can get you into companies and they can get you into the right people that you otherwise could never land into on your own. So when it comes to the networking and application phase, I'm assuming that you're probably familiar with that, but of course on LinkedIn, you can see all of your connections, and you can see what kind of people they can get you into and what kinds of companies. But when it comes to getting to the hiring manager and the other folks that are going to weigh in on a decision, one of the things that you want to do is be able to look at their connections and what connections are relevant to you. So you can do filtered searches on LinkedIn. This is one of the great things, Michael, that you want to keep in mind, because that's one of the best values of LinkedIn. Of course, it's one of the things we're going to talk about on Wednesday night, but you can filter out anybody's LinkedIn connections, and you don't have to look at all 4,000, 8,000 of them. You can tell LinkedIn, hey, I want to look at Marty Gilbert's LinkedIn connections, but I'm only interested in the ones that are located in Boston and New York. I want the ones that have this kind of title and that are in the following 2 industries. And then it will show you all of my connections that fit your needs without having to look at 24,000 LinkedIn connections. Nobody has the time for that. So this is the great feature about LinkedIn that enables you, once you've defined who the audience is you're trying to reach, you can now go into your network, find the people that your network is connected to in the companies where you want to be, and then you simply go to those folks and say, hey, I've gone through your LinkedIn connections. I have found 3 people that you're connected to that I would love to have an introduction to because they're working in companies that are of interest to me. Maybe one of them actually has a job. Do you know any of the following 3 people well enough to make a potential introduction on my behalf? It's an easy ask. It's an easy email to send, and it's an easy phone conversation to follow up on. So this is where you connect the dots between your network and the companies and places where you want to get some visibility. So thanks so much for asking. Here's a great question. Is ageism real? Yes. It's very real. And I'm sorry to say that it's alive and well in the marketplace. And for those of you, just to make sure that we're all on the same page with regard to the definition of ageism, there probably is some ageism with younger people, but it's particularly predominantly happening with folks that are probably over the age of 45 or 50. Because there are so many folks that bring tremendous experience that are competing against individuals that could be 10 or 20 years younger than you. Now, you look at that and you go, I have so much more to offer. And you do in most cases. But the fact is that there are companies and hiring managers who believe I'd rather get somebody who's on the way up in their career as opposed to somebody who's already there and has only somewhere downward to go. Now, it's a very prejudicial perspective, but it does exist. And there are people that believe that. So given that, you've got to be able to sell and market yourself on your value. Anybody who's over the age of 45 has done so much more in their career than somebody who's 35. And you've got to be able to bring that to the forefront. You got to bring that out in the email cover letters that you're sending out to companies that have jobs, that don't have jobs. So that you can bring across the points that are going to differentiate you from some of these younger job seekers. At the same time, there are a lot of companies that are under the impression that older job seekers are getting tired. They're not as motivated. They're not as energetic and aggressive to continue to grow the company. And you've got to be able to overcome those by demonstrating to people about the achievements that you've got from your background, because it's those achievements and those stories that sell. And you would have far more of those than somebody that might be 10 or 20 years younger than you. So you've got to turn your age into your single greatest asset. And, there are so many people that I come across, particularly that I'm coaching, that have been, fraught with age issues. But I've seen many of them land great jobs because, we no longer need to use that as an excuse. Turn it into something that has tremendous value to you. And it is absolutely possible. Let's see here. Here's another question. Oh, I think we addressed that one with Michael. All right, let me find another one here. Here's one. I'm not a great interviewer, and I get nervous leading up to each interview, which I believe comes through in my interviews. Okay. What suggestions might you have to help me overcome, my stress and agitation? Well, I think job search and particularly interview preparation is really the key to nervousness and anxiety. And one of the things that I recommend to so many people when they're in a job search, but particularly when they're interviewing, is take a look at the job description. Identify what are the 5, 6, maybe 7 most important aspects of that job. Line it up on an Excel spreadsheet, and in the left-hand column, list out all those key requirements of the job. There might be 5, there might be as many as 10. And in the column next to it, list out the most important, stories that you can line up with each one of those key job requirements. Those are the kinds of things that will enable you to really sell yourself. Because the stories are the proof behind what you say you can do, the claims that you make. But the stories are the color commentary that enable people to go, boy, she did it there, she could do it here. So I think that simple kind of preparation, again, lining up stories with the most important requirements of the job description, will enable you to feel very self-assured coming into any interview. And one of the things that I always did in interviews that I had, I always took a little book with me. I always carried a logbook. Never went into a job, into a job empty-handed. And I would take a spreadsheet like that and I would put it right on the inside of here, so that if at any point in time I forgot what it was that I was going to tell, what's the story I wanted to say, I glance down in my book, I see a few keywords that remind me of the story, and I'm off and running. And that's that, knowing that I've got that fallback position sitting right in front of me at any point in time gave me tremendous comfort in knowing, you know what, I've got the answer sitting right in front of me at any point in time. And you can use that on a phone screen, a Zoom interview, or an in-person interview, because one of the things we oftentimes do is take notes during an interview. There's nothing wrong with taking notes, and you can have the answers sitting right there in front of me. So that's a great thing to do. Okay, here's a question with regard to maternity leave. So I've been on maternity leave for a few years. What can I do to to address that gap? Okay, and there are a lot of people that have had gaps in their backgrounds. Of course, many people for COVID, if nothing else. Some for maternity leave. We've had a lot of people that have left the workforce to take care of an ailing parent. It happens, and I think there's a lot more understanding in the marketplace today than there ever has been. So one of the things that you want to do is to make sure that you can explain what's been going on. And I can tell you, if the reason for leaving is because of a maternity leave, well, to me, it says a lot about your character, because there are particularly a lot of women that have left the workforce to help raise young children until they're at the point where they can go to a public school or to a private school. So for that reason, there are many people that have left the workforce for 5 or more years. And my feeling is, as long as you're upfront with the company and tell them, this is why I've not been working for the last 2 years, 5 years, to me, if the company can't get over that, then you know what? It's not the right company for you. In my mind, it's not the right company. I've hired a lot of people in my time that that left the workforce, but they left the workforce for a very noble reason. And maternity leave, raising children, taking care of a parent are very good reasons to do that. And to me, my feeling was, somebody who's got that kind of character is the kind of character that I want on my team. So please turn it into a positive. And if at any point in time you'd like to talk about this further, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. But it's nothing that you have to make an excuse for. It's a great way to get people to understand a little bit about you as a person. So here's a question. What is the best way to land interviews when you have a lack of experience? I've gotten a job offer in every interview I've had, but struggle to break into that industry. Okay, well, if you are early in your career, okay, nobody should be, expecting you to have a lot of experience. But if you're transitioning over to another industry, it's always going to be tougher, particularly if you come with a lot of experience and none of it comes from that industry. So I think, a question that we addressed earlier is very much in line with that same question. Here's another question. I don't seem to be ready for the question that I'm oftentimes asked in interviews. And it's simply, tell me a little bit about yourself. Okay? We hear this a lot. We hear it in networking meetings. We hear it in job interviews. And it's just a way, if nothing else, for the interviewer to hear a bit about how you describe yourself, because nobody can describe you better than you can. And the fact is that given that, then your branding statement and your value proposition have really got to come on very strong. Okay, no different than an elevator pitch, right? You've got 45 seconds to capture the interest and excitement of the person who's just already asked you the question. Can you tell me a little bit about you? Okay, and so you've got to be able to define, what's my overarching branding statement, whatever that might be, and then give 3 specific examples that tie into that nicely, okay? Just like an organizational chart would. So you've got to give this a lot of careful thought, but it's oftentimes asked at the beginning of the interview. And given that, it's got to make you come across really dynamic and strong, because if it's a boring response, then guess how they interpret you. This individual is not the kind of person we want on our team. We want somebody dynamic, exciting, with a lot of enthusiasm, something that they bring that we don't have, but we need. So you've got to make sure that, you know, that onset of the interview process is really strong. Here's a question. I've been told not to bother with cover letters. What is your feeling about that? Okay. I'm of absolutely the opposite end of things. To me, and cover letters and emails, to me, they're one and the same. You don't attach a cover letter. The cover letter is the email that you're sending to an individual or to several people inside a company that may have a job, that may not have a job, and that's okay. But what a cover letter does that a resume and a LinkedIn profile are just not capable of doing is it enables you to tell your story in very few words. And that's important, because the average listener doesn't have a very strong or long attention span. The average resume only gets 6 to 10 seconds of read time. But the cover letter, well, it's so important because, among other things, it tells the individual how you can write, how you communicate the value you bring relative to the job that we're trying to fill. And a resume, there's just so much content to read through and to decipher that makes it difficult for people to connect the dots between the key requirements of the job and the most salient aspects of that person's background. But the cover letter, that email, ties them all together. And it's interesting, I heard on the news today that there are only 1 in 3 people that are bothering to write a cover letter today in response to jobs because they don't think they're necessary. But it's interesting because the next question that was asked of hiring managers was whether or not they want cover letters and read them. And 83% of hiring managers said that they really want the cover letter and read them because of the very reasons I just mentioned. It tells them a lot about the way this person communicates. Of course, and you're selling, you're helping them understand why you are an individual that they ought to talk with. So for anybody who thinks that cover letters are extinct, I believe you're absolutely wrong. And it's a way to differentiate yourself, particularly given that 2/3 of the population of job seekers aren't doing them today. It will enable you to stand out. So here's another question here about resumes and LinkedIn profile. Should my resume and LinkedIn profile have the same exact content as one another? There is going to be a lot of the same information, absolutely. But the approach of the two is very, very different. And I tell a lot of the members the same thing over and over again, that the resume is about less is more. How do I say all the right things? How do I get all the right keywords and key phrases into my resume in the fewest words possible? Because the average job seeker is very, very lazy, right? They don't want to read a lot. That's why, the bullet point is so effective in resumes. So less is more when it comes to resumes. LinkedIn profiles, however, are just the opposite. They're about more is more. And the reason why I say that is that what drives people to view your LinkedIn profile is typically one of 2 things. One is your outbound marketing campaign. What are you doing to connect into companies and to connect into key people that you want to, make your background visible to? Your outbound marketing campaign. But the other is your LinkedIn profile and whether or not it's search engine optimized. Because we've got recruiters and hiring managers that are going into the back of LinkedIn. They're plugging in the key skills associated with the position they're trying to fill. And they are then getting a ranking of those individuals on LinkedIn that have the most keyword matches relative to what they're looking for. And the people that are going to rank the highest are going to be the ones that have the most matches when it comes to keywords and key phrases. So they've got to appear time and time again in your LinkedIn profile, which is something you might not do quite as much of in your resume. They got to appear particularly in your headline, where you get 220 characters, and that's a lot. A lot of keywords and key phrases, one right after another in your profile headline. You want them to appear in your job titles because you're not limited just to the exact title of the company where you used to be. You can say a lot more because you are entitled to 100 characters in every title. You want to make sure in every one of the job descriptions that you're using all the right keywords and key phrases associated with the kinds of jobs or job descriptions that you come across time and time again. And you can do this whether you're in finance, IT, sales, marketing, operations, it doesn't matter. But job descriptions are the greatest barometer for deciding what are my keywords? What are the words that I need to have constantly showing up in my LinkedIn profile? And then, of course, at the bottom are the skills and endorsements section, where you want to make sure that you've got a lot of endorsements for the skills that are really important to the companies that are hiring for the specific position of interest to you. This is how you start to rank higher. So let's see, here's another question that came in. I've applied to 8 different jobs over the past 3 weeks online, and I haven't heard back from any of them. Is there anything that I'm doing wrong? Well, there could be a number of different things. I'll just touch on a couple. One is the resume that you've uploaded into the online system, is it Applicant Tracking System compliant? ATSs, right? ATSs are just a piece of software. They're taking a look and scanning the resumes and determine whether or not there's enough keywords in there to give them a high enough score to warrant interviewing them. So if you don't have enough of the right keywords and key phrases in your resume, then there's a good chance that you'll never rank high enough to warrant getting, the interview. The other is your resume formatted in a way that the Applicant Tracking System software can actually read it. So there are probably more than 30 different ATSs out there today, and no two are created exactly alike. So you've got to be able to develop an ATS version of your resume that'll be separate and apart from the version that you attach to an email that you send out to a lot of different people and companies, that is compliant with the most stringent of applicant tracking systems, right? Some of them will not accept any color. Some will not accept any hyperlinks. So if you have your name and then your email address is sitting under it, there are applicant tracking systems that are incapable of reading that link. And as a result, they'll read your name and nothing else after it. It's like looking at a blank sheet of paper and they go, give me the next resume. So you could apply literally to 10, 20 or more jobs and never hear from them simply because of a mistake like that. And I've come up with about 22 different rules and guidelines for developing an ATS version of your resume that you want to make sure you adhere to. Just a couple other things. You might be underqualified for a job. You might be overqualified for a job. But I never encourage people not to, to respond to positions. But I think the better use of time, because responding to jobs should never take more than 5 or 7 hours a week of your job search time, is to get an outbound campaign going to all kinds of companies that don't necessarily have jobs. They may not have a job today, but they might in 3 weeks. They might have a job in 3 months. You never know, but you've got to seed the market and let them know about your value and what you bring to the party. And that's what creates opportunity and exploratory calls that can turn into something very serious. So please, don't hesitate to do that. But there could be a number of different reasons why you're not hearing anything. Here's a question about being overqualified, which I see we've kind of addressed that one. I've had a lot of phone screens, but seldom seem to be getting beyond that point. How can I determine what, if anything, I might be doing wrong? So phone screens are interesting, and they're not easy. Because when you can't see your audience, it's hard to communicate and you don't know how engaged they are. But phone screens are often being handled by somebody in HR, in talent acquisition, who's fairly junior. They may not know a lot about the job that they're actually interviewing you for. Okay, but you can't ding them for that. You've got to find a way to connect with them, because they're sitting there with a piece of paper with a list of what might be a dozen key requirements of skills that they're looking for, and they're checking the boxes. And it's going to take 10 or all 12 of them for them to determine that you're worthy of being passed along to the next step in the process, which oftentimes is the hiring manager. So you've got to find ways to make sure that they are understanding your background but you got to make sure that before that interview is over, is there anything about my background that we haven't covered that you feel is pertinent to the job? Give them one more opportunity to tell you about something that might be missing that they haven't heard from you yet. So, I think you've got to, again, accept the fact that they may not be deep in knowledge about the job that you're looking for, but you've got to make sure that it's clear what is it that they need to have in order to make you pass go. And you've got to ask from time to time in the interview. I've got time for about one more question here. How would you justify several company changes in your career path, especially due to market changes, acquisitions, and/or COVID? There are so many people today that have been changing jobs, particularly over the last, I'd say, 5 to 10 years. It's a frequent occurrence, and it happens. Now, there are companies that believe that people that job hop and have a job for a year or maybe 2 and are constantly changing are potentially more risky candidates. And I get that. I understand that can be the case. But when they ask you, or if they ask you, why have you changed jobs 3 times over the last 5 years? You've got to have a really strong response that makes sense and doesn't jeopardize your candidacy. So I think it's important that you've rehearsed this, and you should rehearse it through something like Zoom, because you can record it. Have somebody team up with you, ask you that question, record it, hear what you sound like, because oftentimes we don't realize, how lacking of confidence we sound, how unsure of ourselves sometimes we sound, or how non-believable our responses are. So, I urge you to go ahead and make sure that that those things are clear and concise, and that you feel are really sellable. So I hope that we had an opportunity to touch on a lot of the topics that you wanted to, and as I mentioned, I'm hoping that this might become a weekly event, on noon Central Time on Mondays. But again, thank you so much for participating in the event. Keep an eye out for future events as well. And if at any point in time I can help you out in your job search, please don't hesitate to email me. And check out the free membership at NSENG at nsenginc.com. All the best to you in your job search. Take care.